Hi everyone. Today I'm going to show you how to applique your shapes onto a background. And this is my third attempt at this. I'm hoping that I get it right this time. The first attempt I forgot some major piece of information. The second attempt I had a phone call coming in, and when I declined the phone call it ended the video, and I'm yapping away thinking it's recording, and here it had stopped. So hopefully the third time is the charm. So first of all, this applique stitch works great whether it's shapes that you've prepared for applique, or whether it's English paper piecing shapes that you want to stitch to a background. So concept is the same whether you've, in this case I use the freezer paper and starch method, which I absolutely love. And I use that method for these, which gives me these really nice curves. Or when I'm doing English paper piecing, I have these nice sharp edges as a result of doing those, the basting, or I should say the tacking stitch when I tack those shapes down. So the process is the same regardless of whatever you're doing. So if I'm doing English paper piecing, what I do is I would take those that completed piece, spray it with a little bit of best press, and press it nice and dry. And then I'll pop out the shapes. And again, because I've done these, this is the tacking method, I can just pop out my shapes and everything will stay in place lovely. So with both cases, what I usually start with first is I like to glue baste my shapes down. And I like to use Roxanne's Glue Basted. It works awesome for this. It's kind of like an Elmer's glue, except that it dries a little bit quicker and it has a really nice fine point. And I really prefer to use this bottle because it makes it really easy. You can squeeze it and get just a tiny bit out, and it never dries out. It's just a really, really great product. So in that case, I would simply just put little dabs of glue all around my edges, and then position it in place. And then I usually like to heat set it with an iron, and that keeps it nice and flat, and it dries it really quickly. So then I'm ready to go. And again, I would have popped these paper shapes out if I was going to do that, but I'm not quite ready to do that on this one yet because I'm not 100% sure what I want to do with that flower. So the next thing to think about is what kind of thread you're going to use. So rule of thumb in applique is that you match the thread to the shape, not to the background. So in a perfect world, you would use a green here, a brown here, but it gets a little bit tricky. So for example, in this case, you're not going to want to change threads every time you come around. So in that case, then I typically just use something neutral, but the key is to have something fine that's going to blend into your fabric and hide. So typically probably my first pick is Aurifil for applique, but what happens is I often don't have the right shade to use. So Masterpiece is another really good option. These are both 50 weight threads. This is an Aurifil 50 weight. That orange means that it's a 50 weight thread. So you can get, what's really nice is Masterpiece makes these bobbins. They call them their super bobs, I think is what they're called. So they have all these different shades. But what's really interesting, even with all those different shades, sometimes you still don't have quite the right shade for what you're working on. So in that case, if I don't have a good match, then I usually go to, the other two go-tos would be, if I'm not going to use a cotton thread, then I'm going to use a polyester thread that's even finer than the Aurifil or Masterpiece thread. So in that case, I'll use, I've always used Superior Threads, the bottom line, which is a 60 weight thread. And the reason it works so great, it's really fine because of the weight, and it just blends in. It almost melts into your fabric. But more recently then, I've been exposed to Invisifil makes a product called Deco Bob, and you can they're on bobbins, and you can store them in these little this little container. And they do the same thing. They make them in all different shades in bobbins of those threads. So that's an option too. I've found that I typically just go to, my go-to now more and more has been one of these two options, these threads. And I'll show you an example. Here's a couple projects I just did recently. So this was an English paper piece project that I then appliqued onto the background. And it would have been a little bit tricky to match all those colors. So I simply used, and I don't know if you can even see here, but I simply used that Deco Bob thread in an off-white and it blended in beautifully, just beautifully. You can hardly see the stitches. Now, of course, I have bad vision, so that's probably why I can't see the stitches. Here's another one. This one will blend a little bit better because it's a print. So this is a pillow I had done, an English paper piece project. Again, I glue basted it down with the Roxanne's glue baste, and then I stitched it. And I picked that same shade of thread again, and you just really can't see the stitches. It works out really good. All right, so that's your first consideration. The next consideration then is what needle to use. So because you're using a fine thread, you're gonna use a fine needle. And that's the trick for invisible stitches, is having a fine thread and a fine needle. So I'm gonna be demonstrating with a heavier thread and a thicker needle, but what you're gonna wanna use is a fine needle. I love milliner needles. They're really easy to hold because they're longer, and they come in different sizes. So for binding work, and for maybe if I'm just doing some hand sewing, I'll use a number 9. But if I'm into fine work like this, I typically use a number 11 milliner. And it also is called a straw needle. That's the same thing. That word is used interchangeably. And there's lots of different brands of them out there. I personally can't tell a whole lot of difference between the brands. But I think the key is that you just want to have a really fine needle. And then the last thing you might want to think about is to use a needle threader. If you can cut your thread nice and sharp with a pair of nice sharp scissors, so like these Omni-Grid scissors work great. I mean, there's tons of good scissors out there, obviously, or these warm crochet scissors, and they're worth it just because they're so beautiful to look at. I often just like them just because they're so pretty. They give you a nice sharp cut, and if you cut it at a little bit of an angle, that gives you, it makes it pretty easy to thread your needles. But if not, you can use a wire needle threader. Just make sure that it's fine enough for the fine needle that you're using. So if you just get a generic one, it's not going to work. But if you get a fine one that's designed for small needles, you'll be okay. Or the Clover Desk needle threader, people really like that. And don't get an off-brand. I just think that Clover brand works better than anything else I've tried. All right, so you're going to start with you're going to tie a knot. And I always do the quilter's knot, and I have a separate video for that if you want to see how that works. But I just wrap it and tie a knot, just big enough that it's going to secure it. And again, I'm using a dark thread so you can see what I'm doing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, and I'm going to come up, and let me put my glasses on here so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm going to come up through all the layers. And let me start over here because I had started stitching on that last video and forgot to rip that out. Okay, so I'm going to come up through all the layers, very close to the fold. Pull the thread through, and then I'm going to go back down. The key is, I'm just trying to make sure you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to go back down straight across from where I came up, but this time I'm going down in the background fabric only. And the key is if you can get it as straight across and as close to the applique shape, but in the background shape, then your stitches aren't going to show that much. And then you're just going to come back up, treble a little bit, and then come back up through all the layers close to the fold and pull it through. Give it a little bit of tug so that it disappears, and then go back down straight across from where you came up this time. You're going down into the background fabric only, and then you're coming back up through all 3 layers. And you just keep working your way across. And your stitches can be as fine as you want. It's totally your call on that. I try to just make it fine enough that it holds it in place nicely. And then when I'm going to end, I simply take it back down into the background fabric, pull it through, and then flip your piece over. And I'm just going to tie a knot here. And I don't even know what that knot is. It's just a loop knot. And you can see that's where that was my first stitching that I did for the first video that wasn't even recording. Okay, and then you just clip your threads off. So this is what what it's going to look like on the back. You're going to see these slanted stitches. All right, but on the front, you should only see just these tiny little stitches. And if it's a fine thread and if it's a neutral or a matching thread, you're not even going to notice your stitches. It works beautifully. So again, I use that on traditional applique shapes or when I do English paper piece shapes that I'm appliquing on. All right, hope you enjoy. Yeah, I hope you come to love and enjoy applique. I love it, and Hope that this stitch helps you a little bit along the way. Have a great day.